Welcome to today's web conference, U.S. Azure Partner Community Call for June. I'd like to turn it over to your first presenter, Nick Johnson, National PTS for Microsoft. Nick, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Kim, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We know you have a choice where you spend your time, so we're glad you chose to spend a little bit of it with us. To get things started today, just a quick rundown of our agenda. So just want to say welcome. We're going to do a quick community roundup. And then we're going to jump into our main presentation, and we've got a couple of fantastic speakers lined up to sort of talk about Microsoft, Red Hat, and the whole open source community, and how does that work with Azure, right? It's a sort of this brand new world to a lot of us, and so we're going to try to get some clarity on what that means for us. How can we help with you as partners? How we can help you drive more success, more revenue opportunities, more opportunities for technology, and those type of things. So we're going to take a strong look at that here over the next hour or so. But before we do that, just a couple of quick reminders. One is we do have the Microsoft Worldwide Partner Conference coming up in just under a month up in Toronto, Canada. We would love for you to join us. It's not too late. There are still spots available, so please consider signing up. If you've got people from your organization going and they would like to talk to one of us or talk to somebody at Microsoft about how do I make my partnership stronger, how do I build my technology base on Azure, anything and everything in between, please let us know. That's a great opportunity to come. We're really excited about all of the different speakers that we've got lined up, both in the breakout sessions and the keynotes. I was looking at some of those yesterday, building my own agenda, and realizing that I'm not going to be able to get to everything I want to get to because there's just going to be so much. So it's going to be a really good session. My team, the Partner Technology Strategists, there's a bunch of us who are going to be there. We're going to be at the US Lounge. So at any point in time, if you want to talk technology, stop by the US Lounge and say, hey, where are the PTSs? There should be somebody there at all times while it's open to be able to answer any questions for you. Just love to meet you as well, and say thanks for being a part of the community. Speaking of community, just a reminder, if you're new here or if somebody invited you to this for the first time, we do have an Azure community for partners. You can see we've got 3 ways we engage you. The call, you're here, so you know that. We've also got a Yammer group, and then we've got a blog that we update regularly. And we try to keep this full of fresh and updated topics that are relevant to you as partners. But we've learned over the last several weeks and months that there is so much stuff coming at us right now that we can't fit it all into one community anymore. And so we've actually added some to try to help you guys who are specialists bring some focus to what you're seeing and hearing and how you're engaging. And so if you missed it, Jonathan Gardner actually posted a blog recently about a new community that is being kicked off for data and analytics. So if you're a partner that's living in the SQL Server side of the world, or it's big data or anything like that, we've got a whole bunch of PTSs that are there ready to engage with you. There's going to be a whole bunch of new content coming. They're actually going to set up a series of calls to be able to run next year as well in Microsoft's new fiscal year. So join that Yammer group. That's a great place to plug in and find out what's going on in the data and analytics world. If you happen to be a part of the EMS world, we talked about this a couple months ago, but just as a reminder that we've also launched a community for EMS partners. Almost 200 of you have already signed up. So if you're interested in the EMS side of the world, please come join us over there. And I want to actually announce something for the group that's pretty cool. Back when we did the EMS call in April, a lot of you posted on your survey, hey, I want to know more about cloud app security. And while it's not officially a part of EMS yet, Cloud App Security is a new thing. It's a hot trend. It's a really cool product. And you asked for training, and so we're going to deliver that for you. So coming up on June 27th, Monday, and then Thursday, July 7th, we've got an overview and then a technical deep dive training on Cloud App Security. If you can't make it those days, don't worry. We're going to record those. We're going to post them to the Yammer groups. If you want to sign up for those trainings, we are going to post the links to sign up for those today to the EMS Everywhere Yammer group, and you can see the link at the bottom of this slide. So if you're interested in joining us for any of those trainings, we'd encourage you to do that or catch up on the recordings after the fact. If you're wondering where can you get these slides, I'm going to post an announcement right now to the messages pane in your chat window, and there's a link to be able to go and download all the slides that we're presenting today from Yammer. So if you want to be able to download those, you can get those there. So with that, I am actually going to turn over to my friend Tim Walton, and Tim has a guest from Red Hat here as well, so I'll let Tim introduce him. But Tim is one of our PTSs who is driving a lot of our strategy around how do we help you as partners build up your open source business, and what does that mean to you, right? How do we figure out this sort of new side of Microsoft that we haven't seen except for the last couple of years? It's starting just in the last year, I should say. So with that, Tim, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nick. Let me just present my desktop here. That should be coming up momentarily. So hi, everybody. I'm Tim Walton. I'm a partner technology strategist. I am focused on the open source ecosystem and how I can enable partners to use open source.
Just checking, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Tim.
So with that, I'll introduce myself, Tim Walton, partner technology strategist. We'll be going over open source. And also I have with me Nicholas Juris-Mantos from Red Hat, who will be going on a deep dive of what the Red Hat offering is of enterprise Linux on Azure. So with that, let's get started. And what I wanted to do very quickly was just to go over open source and what open source represents to Microsoft. If you think about our cloud, it is an open cloud, and there is a lot of open source tools and products that are available. If you look at the slide, it covers all of the workloads in Azure. And what we can see is all the different workloads from DevOps, management, applications, infrastructure, all of this is available through open source and different products. The thing I want to point out, just looking at infrastructure, 30% of our VMs on Azure are running Linux. Also, greater than 50% of the VMs that are being created right now are Linux VMs. It's a massive opportunity. The other thing I'd tell you about how much demand there is out there for open source with our customers, it is the #1 consumer of Azure right now. So when you think about all of these open source tools and products, that is what's driving the biggest consumption of Azure. Just to make it more concrete for partners as well, I want to show a typical scenario that you might be dealing with in your practice. You might perhaps be doing a lift and shift. In this example, the partner, which had Linux skills, did a lift and shift of a large airline. When they did this, because they had the open source skills and they did the assessment, they discovered there was actually quite a lot of compute on Linux. So when they actually did the lift and shift to Azure, OSS, or open source software, actually represents 68% of the deal. And this is what I want to make clear to all partners. If you get engaged and you become proficient in open source, it's going to expand what you can do for your customer and also that Azure consumption. So just to make it clear what really is open source, because sometimes a lot of people just think it's VMs or it's Linux. Obviously, it's more than that. It's pervasive in all the workloads. What I want to do right now is just to make sure that you understand what is the foundation of open source and what makes something open source. The way I think about it is the 3 C's. The first one is choice or freedom. This is really where I think when people think of open source as being free, it's really the freedom to choose the technology and products that you want to use. People prefer to have some kind of control on the direction those products and projects go, and so that's why open source is very compelling to our customers. So it gives people that freedom. You can see that in the licensing for open source, that ability to change. There is no essential vendor lock-in or proprietary software that could be a potential risk to a customer. The next foundational element, I believe, in open source is the community. So the community is what is required to basically deliver value on a specific project you're working. That could be working on an OS like Linux, it could be code, it could be actually documentation. But the community comes together, and the idea from open source perspective is that the community can deliver more than the individual, right? You get synergies when you work together as a group. Together we do more. And what's really important about the community is for it to work, just like we're working together now on this Azure community, is there has to be this open exchange of information, and it has to be accessible. So that's a critical part. The third and final part, and probably the most interesting part for partners, is contribution and participation. We actually live in the participation economy. You as partners are experiencing that when we talk about consumption and active use. You need to participate with your customers to make sure that they're happy, make sure that consumption is valuable. But in open source, it is critically important for the people that are members of the community to move forward and actually add value by contributing to that community. So think of that, it could be code, it could be documentation, it could be an Azure resource management template. Whatever that is, it is important to contribute to that. So to underline that, an active community with meritocracy allows the best ideas to succeed. And I would actually point out for partners, as we go through some of the tools, and specifically GitHub, a lot of customers look to see how much a given partner or customer is contributing to a specific community. So how does that open source way align to what we do at Microsoft? This slide, most of you guys have probably seen before. It's in our Azure deck, but it's very interesting to look at this slide because it aligns very much to the open source way, right? Empowering customers. Notice it says freedom to choose, freedom to change. That again goes back to open source. We enable that to happen by making sure that Azure has cross-platform open standards and interoperability. To do that, we have to make sure that we've got an engaged open source community. And how we differentiate ourselves at Microsoft is we want to deliver this in an enterprise-grade way with security, privacy, and compliance, and transparency. So as you can see, the open source way is very much aligned to the way we think about our open approach to Azure. Just to give you a little bit more about what is Microsoft doing on open source, a lot of people get feedback, is Microsoft really interested in open source? And we absolutely are. If you look at this history timeline, you can see that we've been engaged with open source for many years. I've been at Microsoft for 17 years, and I remember back in 2002, we tried to open source .NET. Back then it was called Rota, I believe. And we open sourced it. It didn't succeed because it was actually a look, don't touch type open source release, so nobody could contribute. But now, as you know, we've released an open source, the .NET Foundation, the .NET Core, Xamarin has been open sourced. We're an active contributor to Apache Cordova. And you can really see that we have delivered a lot of open source. Microsoft now, in GitHub, which we will talk about later, has more than 3,800 contributions, 200 repositories, and it resulted in about 19,000 forks of different source code and documentation. So we're very aggressive in working with open source. So as you talk to your customers, there's a dialogue that I wish you will have with your customers. And first is to inform them that Linux and open source is a first-class citizen on Azure. As you've seen, we've got a good story to tell there. And I want you to begin to discover what workloads they may have in their data center that could be potentially lifted and shifted into the cloud. Once you've identified those, then work to see if you can actually move those to the cloud. And then obviously, fourth and finally, expand what you're doing with a customer. That doesn't mean just moving other workloads, but perhaps cloud optimizing the workloads that you've already moved to Azure. And as I sort of finish up here to round it out for open source, a lot of people do ask, what is in it for Microsoft? Some people say now that we're in the cloud, we're all about cycles, running cycles in the cloud. The way I think about it is we create the supply chain of compute, and we need to do that in an enterprise, scalable, secure way. Whether that compute comes from source code or proprietary IP, it doesn't matter, as long as we're delivering a great choice to our customers. So with that overview of open source and how we're working together with open source, I wanted to bring up very quickly some tools that you can get started if you're new to open source, and this is a journey for me too, and this is some of the tools that I've begun to use. And I would say these three tools are important for you to begin to use. The first is GitHub, which is a sort of a source code repository that Microsoft and Red Hat actually use to build that community and contribute back to the community. So I'll go over that. The other tool that I'm going to go over is running essentially a bash command line, so very Linux-like, in fact it is Linux, on Windows 10, and then utilizing the Azure CLI to interface with the Azure cloud. So if I quickly talk about GitHub, let me just exit out of this. If we look at GitHub, it is available, as probably most of you are aware, on the web, and it is the source repository that our community contributes to. So for example, in GitHub, as you can see here on my screen, it is where we keep all of our Azure Quick Start templates. So for example, I'm looking at one here, which is a deployment of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. You can click in here, it'll visualize the JSON and give you exactly what this quick start is going to push to the cloud. From GitHub, you can actually then publish or deploy that to Azure with a click. So as you can see, we are actually actively using GitHub to push out our quick start templates. The other thing that we're using GitHub for is to do all of our content. So when you think about the documentation for Azure, it is actually out on GitHub, and you can contribute to that. I get a lot of feedback that, you know, our documentation should be better. I would recommend that most partners go into there, sign up for GitHub, and begin to contribute to the Azure documentation. What I think is very interesting, I'll just show here, you can see Red Hat, who's going to be talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux very soon. They are actually very active on GitHub. You can see they're contributing to multiple things. For example, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, even to Puppet. So again, a great partner that's on open source needs to be contributing. In fact, what I've been seeing within the open source community is they actually use GitHub to get statistics about a given partner or customer to see how active they are in open source. So for example, you can, if I'll bring this up, use Power BI to connect to GitHub. You can then pull all of that data and begin to get statistics on who is contributing and where. So in this example, hopefully this comes up on your screen, you can see that using Power BI, I can actually get details about who is contributing to .NET. It's very interesting here. You can see that Google is the #1 contributor. Obviously, we're not on there. This is other companies. Google and Samsung are actually contributing to the .NET code. So very interesting. So my message to partners there is when you start to get engaged with open source, make sure you're contributing by either creating these Azure Quick Start templates or contributing to our documentation. So let's talk a little bit about Bash. So when you get involved with open source, most of the tools come from Linux. So one of the great features that we've released on Windows is a Bash command line script. So right here, and let me close this down just so you can see the speed of this. So once you have the preview build of Windows 10 or Redstone, you can then enable Bash on Windows. So when I click on this icon, I now have access to the Bash command line. This is very interesting because this is actually true Linux binaries that are calling into Windows NT. This is not a VM. This is Linux binaries running on Windows, and what we do is we get those Linux system calls and redirect them to the Windows operating system. So once I have that, I can begin to do common tasks that Linux administrators can use. So for example, I could begin to list some files. Here I'm just listing what's in my user directory. I can run certain programs, calendar, I can list the processes that are running. Again, it is a full experience of Linux. I didn't install any VMs, it's just a feature of Windows 10. So once we have that running, it can then help you understand Linux, help you with the certification, which we'll talk about later, but it's a really good tool for you to begin to know. Once you have Bash installed, you can then install Node. What Node is probably the #1 tool or platform that open source users utilize. So Node is just simply a JavaScript server that can then run several programs on. So here I'm actually accessing Node. You can see I've installed it. And by the way, I have all of the links and directions, instructions to install Bash and also install Node, etc. onto the script. So that's in the decks. So here I've accessed Node. So now it's really just JavaScript that I'm executing on a server. I have Node running. Once I have Node, I now have access to Node Package Manager. Think of this as a tool that gives you the ability to download very, very popular tools for managing open source. So for example, one of those tools is the Azure Command Line Interface. So now that I have Node installed and I also have NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, NPM is running, I can use NPM to download our Azure Command Line Interface. Once I have that, I can then begin to access Azure. So in this case, I'm just going to list some of the commands I can execute against my Azure instance. It's very similar to PowerShell, but this tool runs on all platforms, and I think it's very key for you to be able to use this. So now you can see as I scroll through all the different commands, I can actually manage completely all the resources in Azure. So for example, I could say, hey, let me have a look at what my account is on Azure. That will go out, reach out to Azure, and then I have details of my account. I can also begin to say, hey, what VMs do I have running in my Azure subscription? That's going to go out, execute remotely, and tell me what different VMs I have. In this case, under a resource group, I actually have a Red Hat instance. So from here, I could then say, if you notice, the VM instance is stopped. So I'm going to say, let's start that up. Make sure I give it the resource group and also the VM name. If I do that, again, it's going to go out to Azure and begin to start up that VM. Once I do that, I can then get details and begin to manage that VM, and do anything that you can potentially do in PowerShell. And all of this is obviously scripting. So as this starts up the VM, I will give it a few seconds here, and I'll show you some of the other commands we can run against that VM. Let's just give it a few more seconds. Again, as this is running, remember, this is not a VM. It is an actual Linux binary running on Windows 10. So that has started it up. I can get details about my VM, just as you would with PowerShell. Let that run. It'll give me all the details about my Red Hat VM that's running out there. Interesting thing here is that I've got the IP address right from this command prompt. Now I can then SSH secure connection into my VM. So in this case, I'll log on as me. Make sure I get the IP address right. Help if I type the parameters correct. So that's actually going to go out now and connect to that VM. It's asking me for the password, so hopefully I remember that. And now I'm actually logged into that Red Hat VM, and I can begin to manipulate that and execute any of the commands that I need in Linux. So as you can see, this is a very powerful tool, I think, for anybody who's beginning the journey on open source to start to use, and I strongly recommend that you get skills built up on using the Azure CLI. So with that, let me just close this down and go back to the slides. And so, just summarizing what we've seen here, I hopefully have explained what really the open source way is, how Microsoft matches with that open source way, and how we deliver that through choice. And also, hopefully I've showed you some new tools. Again, the instructions on how to install them will be in the slides, and you can begin to get involved with the community via GitHub and start to use some of these tools. So with that, what I'll do is I'll hand over to Nicholas, who's going to actually do a deep dive in Red Hat and what the opportunity really is with Red Hat. Remember, when you think about enterprise Linux, there is huge pent-up demand from our customers to run an enterprise-grade Linux. And now that we have our offering with Red Hat, it represents something that a lot of customers have been asking for, and we really do need partners to help them implement that. The one thing I'll finish with, open source, because it is the #1 consumer of Azure, there are going to be a lot of partner programs that are going to be announced at WPC on us essentially training partners to get better at open source, but also funding programs to allow you to go to your customers and begin to get those first workloads. So with that, Nicholas, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. And let me know when you can actually see my screen.
It's loading right now, and just a reminder while it's doing that for everybody, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, down in the lower left-hand corner of your browser, there's that messages button. Feel free to just click on that, and you can actually type in your question, and we'll relay that to our presenters. And we can see your desktop now, Nicholas.
Okay, perfect. So, my name is Nicholas Strauss-Matos. Specifically, I work with cloud service providers, such as Azure. And I'm going to go into a little bit about Red Hat, what Red Hat is, what we deliver, why we are the #1 open source leader, and then also talk a little bit about what we're doing with Azure and the power of Azure in deployability, flexibility, as people are starting to move towards adopting cloud-based applications and the hybrid model. So Red Hat is the current world-leading developer and supplier of open source software for enterprise IT. We have 8,300 employees spread out geographically over 85 worldwide offices, and we cover 35 countries. We offer a comprehensive portfolio of products and services. So I'm sure a majority of people know Red Hat as Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We actually have a much larger portfolio and solutions. We probably won't cover all of those today. So I encourage you to take a look and see if there's any other solutions. We could obviously have more sessions. We could deep dive, into a lot of different things like that. But the main thing that Red Hat delivers is exceptional price and performance, operational flexibility, obviously open source quality and innovation, and alignment with customer requirements. And another thing that I want to touch on is, that billion-dollar S&P 500 index companies use Red Hat, and there's multiple reasons for that. Security, stability, the fact that we have a global support for these customers, and also when it comes to Azure, there's a very close relationship between Red Hat and Azure currently. So I'm going to go into a little bit about the strategic partnership between Red Hat and Microsoft. So we have integrated support for services for cloud or hybrid clouds. So this includes Red Hat products in on-premise customer environments and obviously on Microsoft Azure. We are working on making .NET integration and availability within Red Hat Linux, including in Atomic Host and OpenShift, which are container management solutions. We offer Red Hat products and that are supported on Microsoft Azure and Microsoft Windows. So if you look at .NET, for example, within containers running on OpenStack platform or in Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, we will be supporting that in entirety. And then obviously, Microsoft joins the Red Hat Certified Cloud and Service Provider Program. So Microsoft is a CCSP, which is the highest level of certified cloud service providers that exist currently. So infrastructure without boundaries. As I mentioned earlier, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a trusted open source operating system, specifically geared towards enterprise customers across the globe, and they rely on their business critical workloads on it. One of the main things between Microsoft Azure and a lot of other service providers is we have subscription flexibility with Red Hat Cloud Access. So I'll deep dive into that a little bit. Let's say a customer is currently running Red Hat Enterprise Linux on-premise. They decide that their next generation workloads, they want to run them in Azure, or maybe they're looking to retire some of their data centers, or more importantly, let's say they're growing globally. We actually recently had a very large customer. They went through a series of acquisitions, and as they were going through these acquisitions, they realized that some of these companies that they were acquiring that were globally didn't really have a data center footprint. They didn't have data center staff to manage these locations and this infrastructure, and they really didn't want to invest in building out data centers for high availability within these geolocations. And so they started looking at solutions, right? And one of the main solutions was obviously Azure. They wanted to keep their same information technology department. They wanted to keep their same set of tools. They wanted to keep their same set of, Linux distribution, which is Red Hat. And they also wanted to bring things like, Gluster for distributed storage and scale some of that stuff out into Azure. So really, for the most part, they wanted to kind of build a hybrid strategy, but more importantly, they wanted to keep their CapEx and their OpEx low and still increase scalability. And when I say that they actually acquired a series of companies, I think it was more along the lines of 8 to 10 companies that they acquired over a 6-month period of time. So that's pretty aggressive. And they leaned on a very large solution provider to help them with that. This solution provider provided the architecture, they provided best practices, they worked closely with Red Hat and Microsoft from their architecture perspective to make sure that they were following best practices. So that's just one example. Obviously, there's a marketplace for images on demand, so we try and make it as easy as possible for people to get ramped up on Azure. We know that some people are still trying to learn about, the cloud-based technologies and hybrid cloud and what it means, and we're trying to make a lot of that stuff as simplified as possible. And obviously, foundation of next-generation architectures, as I alluded to earlier. So maybe it's mobile-based applications that are very latency sensitive, and you're deploying some of this stuff in Europe. Customers that might have a data center in the Midwest or on the West Coast, it doesn't make sense for them to deploy these applications, within the United States because customers suffer performance degradation and issues. So that ties into the foundation of next generation architectures. We know that Internet of Things is growing. We know mobile applications are growing. And obviously the expectation from customers to have things instant gratification is growing as well. And as I alluded to earlier, we are trusted by Fortune 500 companies. So enterprise operating system, what is RHEL, right? And how does that tie into Azure? So we have on-demand images via the marketplace for consumption, subscription portability via cloud access. So as you retire infrastructure within your own data center, you don't have to go through the process of acquiring new subscriptions, right? We have what we call, BYOL and BYOS, which is you can take your subscription portability and you can move that directly into Azure. It doesn't require you to constantly keep buying new subscriptions and new licenses and things along those lines, right? So maybe I have a very large data center and I want to retire half of it. And I want to move some of this stuff into Azure, and I want the high availability, or I want to build a hybrid-based cloud, or I want to, do segmentation. I want developers to develop in the cloud for my next-generation applications, and I want to leave my legacy stuff within my own data center. You don't actually have to go out and completely change your model. You could take your subscriptions and you could move them directly into Azure. And then, as I mentioned earlier, next generation architectures, right? We're seeing a huge demand for people adopting things like containers, distributed storage, high availability. They're trying to build distributed applications. Cloud computing is growing. So, is this slide is kind of summarizing. There's a pent-up demand for Azure, right? And there's a pent-up demand for enterprise-grade Linux in a public cloud. Customers, they want to be able to take what they're using currently and what they're comfortable with and that they feel is, production ready, and they want to move some of those things into the cloud. And obviously, publics are very interested in using community distributions. They might want to adjust the distribution. They might want to contribute to it. They don't want to use closed source, solutions. They really want to adopt open source solutions because they have the ability and the flexibility to actually participate and drive the direction that those distributions are actually moving. So how can, you win by using Red Hat, right? Obviously highlighting the value of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Azure, using the joint integrated enterprise grade support. Red Hat and Azure, we are working very incredibly close together to make sure that the customer experience is very seamless and they don't have to go through the entire process of, what I like to call the blame game, right? We have the flexible consumption model, so on demand or BYOS, being your own subscription. We're secure, stable, and offer a modern platform for hybrid clouds. And I think that's really important to talk to customers, right? Maybe they're migrating to Linux. They've never used Linux before, and they're looking at all these different distributions. And if you're familiar with Linux, there are a ton of distributions to take a look at. Now, some of them are smaller, and most of them don't really have the same level of support as Red Hat. Red Hat is the largest distribution of Linux that's out there. So therefore, we have built a cornerstone of support when it comes to providing customer service and making sure that security patches are released in a very timely manner, and that we're meeting compliancy. We do a lot of things in the FSI space. So, financial services, government-based installations, and things along those lines. And also consistent hybrid management with CloudForms. So I'm not going to deep dive into that today, but I am going to talk a little bit about it. CloudForms actually allows you to manage on-premise infrastructure and Azure infrastructure through a single pane of glass. And what I mean by that is you can actually write APIs directly to CloudForms, and CloudForms will translate that into whatever the API is for Azure, for example. So maybe your on-premise environment, you're using CloudForms to manage that. Suddenly you want to start using a cloud provider like Azure. You don't want to completely rewrite your entire applications or your deployment model over and over and over again, right? You're burning cycles. You have to hire new developers. You have to retrain them. It doesn't really make sense. So, there's a big win there by pushing consistent hybrid cloud management. So one of the major things to focus on is don't forget to discuss the value of the full Red Hat and Microsoft portfolios, right? Focus on the zero-sum use cases like lift and shift, right? Data centers that customers are looking to retire or that they're looking towards moving to a hybrid model, or maybe just in general, they want to lower CapEx and OpEx and they want to retrain their staff for the next generation of architecture. And make sure to highlight the partnership that will continue to grow and continue to evolve and deliver more value to the end customer. So Red Hat Gluster Storage, it is a reliable, cost-effective storage solution that's engineered for hybrid cloud environments. Now, let's take that out for a second. What really is Gluster Storage? Gluster is a distributed, infinitely scalable storage solution. And Gluster can be deployed on-premise. It can be deployed within the cloud. It allows you to scale up and scale out. It provides rich media and archival for both structured and unstructured data. And it also allows you to file sync and share. And that's a very important thing when it comes to file sync and share, which is if a customer is doing a hybrid-based solution and they want to run Gluster within their own data center and they want to run Gluster within Azure, they have the ability to do that. They don't have to completely re-architect their entire, applications. Their business units don't have to worry about, now we have to move a completely different direction. They have the ability to lift and shift. So that ties into hybrid storage, right? Scale up, scale out, rich media and archival, file sync and share. So what are the main things to look for? Obviously, customers searching for an open, scalable, software-defined solution. Obviously, software-defined is a very large buzzword nowadays, right? We hear software-defined all the time. Customers are also looking at POSIX-compatible solutions. These allow the ability to ease the migration of Linux workloads to Azure without avoiding costly rewrites. And obviously, by costly rewrites are completely redoing your applications. Target use cases, machine analytics like Splunk, for example, big data such as Hadoop, media streaming, enterprise file sharing, data archival, geo-replication for disaster recovery. There are a ton, and we could go into that, deeper. If you want, feel free to contact me, and I can provide you as much information on Gluster as you want. So how do you win? Highlighting the value of Gluster Storage in Azure. Focusing on the fact that it's simple to install and configure with a very minimal footprint. So Gluster could actually be deployed initially as a very small footprint. You don't have to go out and deploy, 20 nodes or 100 nodes or 400 nodes. You could start very simple, as small as 5 individual nodes, and you can bring up a Gluster cluster. Azure availability sets for data availability during planned and unplanned outages. So, you have the ability for Azure, obviously, to build a highly scalable and fault-tolerant environment. Asynchronous multi-region data replication. So you could have Gluster spread across multi-regions and do data replication with support for on-premise all the way to Azure hybrid cloud scales. Built-in advanced features such as snapshots, quotas, erasure coding, and intelligent tiering. So some people want to, limit individual groups, business units. They want to have intelligent tiering, so high-performance data sits within a certain group. Medium performance data sits within another different group, and maybe cold storage, for example, that you have to retain for compliancy such as PCI and things along those lines, you can archive that off. So obviously, don't ignore opportunities to challenge customers' perception of lock-in and other public clouds on storage and data. It's important, understand their needs, their wants, and try to address them. And customers sometimes don't really understand the full perception of what vendor lock-in is. Also, don't underestimate the value of POSIX compatible, for Linux applications in Azure. It's very important to focus on POSIX compatibility. And don't forget the unstructured data is the fastest growing type of data in the enterprise today. If you've ever dealt with Splunk or things like Hadoop, once again, these are big words that a lot of people are focusing on. Data is growing at an exponential value or exponential amount. And so, being able to actually make use of all of this data that we're collecting is incredibly important. So also continue to tie in with infrastructure without boundaries. Red Hat CloudForms, as I mentioned earlier, is a way for hybrid cloud management platform, intelligent cloud brokering, and system center integration. So it provides unified management and operations, such as single pane of glass, lifecycle management. So you could build automation using a various set of tools, APIs. You could integrate a lot of that stuff directly into CloudForms, and you can deploy CloudForms at a high availability. So you can deploy it within your own data center. You can deploy it within Azure. There's a lot of ways that you can actually have high availability with it. There's visibility analytics. So you have the visibility of your virtual machines, where they're running, where they're located. You can pull reporting, obviously compliance and governance. So if a developer or an engineer makes a configuration change, CloudForms can actually see within that virtual machine and say, wait a minute, I didn't authorize this change, or this individual didn't have a ticket or permission to make this configuration change. It can either alert and therefore people will take action on it, or it can actually roll back on its own. And then obviously integration and composability. So, building composability is one of the major features to focus on there. People want to build templates, right? After you build a template, you can deploy it. You can deploy it to multiple geolocations, and then you can take that template and make V2 and V3 and V4. So you can have multiple versions of those templates, and it aids in rapid time to market. It decreases the amount of work that developers have to do and engineers have to do, and it's consistency. So back to integrated support. Red Hat, Microsoft have created an industry-changing integrated support model, for customers that are using Red Hat solutions in Azure, more than I think any other cloud provider currently at this time. We're working side by side to solve common problems and to provide enterprise-grade support that customers rely on in their data centers. As a matter of fact, we actually have support staff from Red Hat and Microsoft that are co-located in Redmond working together. The Red Hat and Microsoft security response teams are working very closely together. Most patches are actually released to Red Hat Update Manager within a very small period of time, I believe less than 24 hours. Red Hat is actively participating in the Azure forums, answering questions, trying to provide customers with the best-in-class experience when it comes to architecture and things along those lines. We have an integrated ticketing system, so when you file a ticket within Azure, it actually replicates to Red Hat, so we have visibility into it. And we actually have Red Hat technical account management tied very closely with Microsoft Premier Services, which is a very important thing. So we have, this is kind of a complex slide, right? But we're working very close with solution providers to provide them with a solution provider program. We have an internet service vendor program that we're also working on, GSI program, cloud and service provider program. This is more in tune to, VARs or service providers that are looking to help broker that transition, lift and shift change. We have embedded programs. We have a lot of training partner programs, right? So customers who are deploying stuff in Azure have the ability to go into Red Hat's support portal. They can read documentation. They can read white papers. They can participate in any way, shape, or form that they want. There's a lot of ways for them to consume, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, best practices, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, how they would orchestrate an application and things along those lines. We obviously highly recommend Red Hat Connect for technology partners and programs, just so that you can actually display to customers that you're talking to and such that, hey, we're certified. We know what we're doing. I think that's a very important thing, right? A lot of customers, they might be looking for something along those lines. What separates your company from another company? And I think this is a very key part of the strategy. And then obviously the Red Hat Developer Program. Get involved. It doesn't matter if it's contributing code. It doesn't matter if it's contributing documentation. It doesn't matter if you're doing things on Git. Find a way to get involved. We love people to get involved. It doesn't have to necessarily be, customers. It could be end users. It could be individuals. But find a way to get involved in some way, shape, or form. Attend meetups. Spread knowledge. We're very much into having a seamless way of communication. So based on this, I'm actually going to show you a demo of deploying an ARM template. It's based on JSON. I'll go through a little bit of the Azure dashboard, and then I'll also show you a little bit of how you can troubleshoot Azure virtual machines.
So Nick, as you're doing that, just a reminder for folks, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. And just a heads up too, we've got about 5-6 minutes left.
Okay. So I will try and go as quickly as I can here. So obviously, here's the Azure dashboard. Is maybe many of you have seen, some of you have not. You can see service, health, marketplace, help and support, things along those lines. So this is the Azure visualizer. It was mentioned a little bit earlier. This is a way for you to visualize what you're building out, right? So your virtual machine, which is attached to storage, your network interfaces, maybe it's a load balancer and a public IP, things along those lines, right? And you have the ability to look at multiple quick start templates. And more importantly, you could actually click on a VM and you can look at the resource properties and modify these properties. So, you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. And if you wanted, for example, to add another virtual machine, you could. And if you want to delete it, it's just that simple. You could go through and it's gone. So what I'm going to show you now is how to deploy a very simple virtual machine and then configure WordPress on it through a single click. So it'll pull the image from the marketplace. It'll ask you for the parameters that you want to use. So I'm just going to use the username Red Hat. And I'm going to type in the password here. And hopefully I don't make any typos. And I'm going to create a resource group. And let's say I want to deploy this within the Eastern United States. And then I have to read and agree to legal terms, which I'm sure we've all read every single line of this. And then I'm going to want to pin this to the dashboard so I could actually see some of the deployment that's going on. So after I hit click, it's going to pull all of that information from that template that we specifically specified. It's going to validate all of that information. Obviously, it's going to make sure my username, my password, everything that I specified. And then you can actually see here that it's submitting the deployment for that template. And you can also see here that the deployment has actually started. It usually takes 4 to 5 minutes for this entire deployment to actually go through. So I don't want to take up all of the time that we have available. So I don't know if you want to open this up for a Q&A at this point in time. I don't want to go too far over it, but I'll show you one last thing before if we do open it up for Q&A, which is you actually have the ability to download those templates. So you could actually see the entire JSON file, and you have the ability to edit it. And then you could actually upload it on your own. And then, for example, this is just a bash script that I put together that goes through and basically installs the WordPress database, downloads and installs WordPress. It configures WordPress. It configures htaccess, opens firewall ports. It then obviously does a permissions change to htaccess, and then it starts Apache. So within a matter of minutes, you actually have a full application that's been deployed from start to finish. And once you build these templates, you can use these as many times as you want in multiple different Azure resource groups. So as you can see over here in this resource group, here's my Red Hat WordPress resource group. And you can actually see it's built my VM, it's built my VM interface, my public IP, the networks. So if I go to my public IP, and it still might be in the process of building it out, but I'll try and see if I can connect it real quick. And if I cannot, then
well, Nicholas, as you're doing this is Tim, and you're waiting for those resources to get built out, that we do have some very specific calls to action that are in the slides for partners. If you are interested in becoming more of a partner with Red Hat, we have instructions for that. And I would say it would be critically important for you to really look at this. Microsoft is really looking to build out its capacity on enterprise Linux. So please look at those call to action slides and some of the click-throughs that you can do. Try to see, I would love it if some partners go out there to do and get their Linux on Azure certifications, a brand new certification. I'd love for you to be able to do that. If you've already got that going or you're planning on doing that, please let me know. And also let Nicholas and I know if you want to get involved more heavily with Red Hat and begin to build out that practice on delivering enterprise Linux on Azure.
And just to kind of close things out, if you are interested in having that conversation with Tim or with Nicholas, their email addresses are in the slide deck that you can download. So that's an option as well. I posted a link to that over on the Yammer group. Just maybe we have time for one question. I don't know if you guys can talk about any monitoring tools or management tools that are available from an Azure standpoint to help you manage and monitor your Linux VMs.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead into the virtual machines. And sorry, I didn't know that I was going to go so slow through everything. I would have sped up, so my apologies. And this might take a minute or two to load, so bear with me. Obviously, it was just being built out. So you actually have the ability to look at the resource health, the boot diagnostics. So this is a very important thing that a lot of customers use, and it provides you a lot of visibility. So, let's say you make a configuration to a virtual machine and you modify fstab, right? And fstab is the way of actually configuration of disks. And let's say your boot image, you somehow deleted or made a configuration change and it's no longer booting, right? You actually have all of the syslog that is showing you every single component and piece of how it's bringing up these virtual machines. So you could actually go through here, you could pull up all of this information, which obviously, as you can see, is a ton of info, and then you could actually screenshot it, and then you could save that file, and then you could upload it to your support case. You obviously also have the ability to look at the resource health to see, how is it doing, is it suffering any type of problems, and you also have the ability to troubleshoot. So based on that, then do you want to turn it over to questions?
Yeah, we're gonna get ready to close out the call here. We'll take one more question, but as we do that, Kim, I think, is going to post a survey link in the sidebar for us there. So if you folks, before you leave, if you wouldn't mind to fill out that survey for us today, that'd be fantastic. So look for that coming here in just a second. And if you want to stay and listen to a couple more questions, we'll take one or two more. So any plans around Operations Management Suite and Linux and sort of the tie together there?
So yes. So when it comes to the Linux management suites, that kind of ties into a lot of the CloudForm space stuff. What was the first part of the question?
I'm just wondering like what that looks like today and what the roadmap might be that you're aware of.
So we actually already have integration with CloudForms with Azure. So that's kind of already been taken care of, I guess, in a sense. And then obviously System Center Virtual Machine Manager, we're working closely with Microsoft trying to bridge that out for hybrid cloud customers as well.
Okay, great. Another question that came in is for those partners that have traditionally lived in the Windows world, right? Don't spend a lot of time on Linux. What are some of the top solutions that customers, at least by type, if not by name, are running on Azure today? I'm sorry, running on Linux today.
That could be anything from Splunk to Hadoop to it could be containerization. It could be JBoss for middleware. It could be Apache for web-based services. Pretty much the list is endless when it comes to the type of application. So I would say a lot of middleware and a lot of next generation types of architectures. Some customers are running some very high performance databases, so they might be running things like Galera, which is a distributed database. So, you know, I could actually, I'll edit the PowerPoint and that we're going to be sending out, and I'll include direct access to some of the main applications that customers are looking at deploying or are actively deploying. Another one that I'll talk about is Feed Henry, which is the ability to write an application, like let's say, for example, you know, iOS or Android or whatever you want to consider to be any type of mobile-based application, and actually take that code that you've already written, and it can do an extrapolation of it and port it to another platform, which is huge for saving time for developers.
Yeah, Nicholas, as well, we do have a slide, maybe we could add it in, but the top workloads that we see, and when we did the analysis, is essentially this web infrastructure, web apps. Also, obviously, IT infrastructure is a big one, but one that's really far out there, and it was actually in the demo that Nicholas did, is, you know, open source relational databases such as MySQL and Postgres. They are one of the top workloads. So when you think about, you know, a customer and they may have like a web app that they developed, they've got web infrastructure, that's probably one of the top workloads, and then going into the open source relational databases and some of the NoSQL stuff. So that's normally the top workloads that we see in the customers where they're utilizing Red Hat.
Yep,
hopefully that answers the question.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. We are at the end of our time, so we're going to go ahead and close out. There's some calls to actions on the screen here. Again, if you want to know more about Red Hat, you want to build a partnership, reach out to Nicholas and to Tim. Their email addresses are in that slide deck. They would love to meet you. If you'll be at the Worldwide Partner Conference, I know Tim will be there and would love to have a chance to talk to you. We'll be doing more of these specifically focused on the open source community in the months ahead. So stay tuned to the Yammer group and to announcements on there for upcoming schedules, and we'll also be doing some blog posts. I know Tim is in the process of authoring one right now. So a lot more information to come. We really want to help you as partners drive success around the open source community. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out. Thank you for your time. And Kim, if you want to go ahead and close us down.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, your feedback is important. We hope that you found today's information helpful. Please take a few minutes to let us know by completing a short survey. Please click on the messages button to find the link to the survey. And you can access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference. And I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Nick, Tim, and Nicholas. This concludes today's web.